Let's talk about the Federal Reserve, right? Because in a new ad, the president sort of pokes fun at so-called trickle-down economics, right? Kind of just saying, poo-pooing it doesn't really exist. However, think about what the Federal Reserve is doing, folks, right? They're lowering rates so that people who have assets, i.e. homes they can refinance, cars they can purchase, and stocks that will go up are getting wealthier in the hope that those savings on interest rates will then trickle down to the rest of the economy. Is that true? Let's bring in Rick Santelli and Steve Liesman. Steve, first to you. I say the Fed is practicing trickle-down economics. What say you?
I say you can't have it both ways, right? My good friend and colleague Rick Santelli is going to complain that the Federal Reserve has really hurt savers in this world today, right? Okay, so who are the opposite of savers? Borrowers. If you're helping savers, you can't be hurting. You have to be hurting borrowers. So it's actually the other way around. They're hurting savers. They're hurting people who are.
Yes,
clipping
no. If my mortgage is $3,000 a month, right? And then I refi and now it's $2,600 a month or whatever it is.
Right.
The Fed is hoping I take that $400 I've just saved and exchange it for goods and services that I reckon will at some point trickle down through more manufacturing or whatever. That, my friend, is trickle-down economics.
Well, but what if your mortgage is $1,000 a month and you just save $200 a month? You've just helped you, who is saving $200 a month. What's wrong with that? Why is that trickle down?
Well, what say you, good friend and colleague Rick Santelli?
Well, first of all, I think that you can't have a mutually exclusive argument here where you're hurting savers and not helping borrowers. And my evidence of that is to look at the excess reserves that banks are carrying. I believe it's about $1.8 trillion. So the problem with the whole trickle-down theory and the problem that it's going to help borrowers is that this little thing called a transmission pipe is broken. So the Fed keeps pouring all the water there, but not enough is coming out of the other end. It really is a trickle because it's all clogged up in excess reserves, a hugely flawed part of the strategy.
No, but Rick, excess reserves is a byproduct of a program the Federal Reserve has, which is to lower rates. And lowering rates has to help people who are borrowers. By definition, more middle-class people and lower middle-class people and poor people are borrowers than they are savers. And so to the extent that the Federal Reserve is lowering rates, it's hurting savers and trying to help borrowers. And by definition, that would accrue. It would be one of the few ways the Federal Reserve could help out middle-class people.
I would argue, though, that any... Hold on, I'm sorry. Let me play Rick Santelli for a minute, Rick, and then you can respond to yourself.
Make sure you gesticulate.
I will. I always do anyway. I would argue that any savings that poor people would have, or any benefit they get is killed by the inflationary aspects to gasoline and food, which are extremely regressive costs.
And those you are sure are direct results from quantitative easing.
I'm not sure they are.
I agree with you, Sully.
But they're there.
I agree with you.
Well,
you said it well.
If it's from quantitative easing and the net effect of the inflation from quantitative easing is to wipe out any gains to aggregate demand, then I agree with you. I just don't think all of it comes from what's happening with QE. Look what's happened to oil prices since the Fed acted. Look what's happened to, other prices. Grain prices have come down. So I think that's a major issue that you have to sort of be more sure about, Sully, if you're going to make that case. And by the way, you changed your argument midstream.
What do you mean? Whoa. You just accused me of changing my argument.
You changed your argument entirely.
Okay, here we go.
You began by talking about how it was trickled down. That was a problem with the plan. Then you're saying it's eroding whatever benefits are there because of inflation. That's an entirely different argument.
No, I was responding to your comment about the benefit to the lower.
Well, but what happened to the first argument on trickle down? What happened to that?
I'd like to bring it back somehow.
Well, let's go. You lost that argument. That's why you moved on.
What about the ultimate trickle-down, QE3 supposedly getting us more jobs? What about that?
Okay, so let's talk about that. I think that's interesting. I think it's not the best tool for creating jobs. I think a lot of the best tools for creating jobs are probably on the fiscal side. But you and I both know what Congress and the president have been up to these days, which is almost absolutely nothing in terms of being able to pass anything from Washington. So what tools are out there? The Fed has a series of blunt tools. It can buy treasuries. It can buy mortgages. That's just about all it can do.
I agree. And let's get even more. Let's get even more granular to Steve's point here. The president of the United States in an ad pokes fun at so-called trickle-down economics, calls it the failed trickle-down policies, basically says that the government, that the economy shouldn't go from the rich down. But yet when I look at the Fed action, Rick, right, a Fed not controlled by the president of the United States, but at least still in Washington, D.C., with a chairman appointed by the president of the United States in large part, right, that their policies are in effect benefiting the wealthy right, in the hope that the savings from lower rates will trickle down and create jobs. So you got the president slamming it over here and the Fed practicing it over here, and I'm just trying to point out what I view as a giant contradiction.
I mean, that's...
All right, wait a minute. Come on, time out. Let me have one say-so.
You.
Okay, you did, but I'll summarize. You know, Steve, you're eloquent, but I want to really cut to it. Here's what I see. I see a strategy that was meant to throw all this money into the banks so it did trickle down, which wouldn't be bad. But it isn't working.
No.
And one of the reasons, wait a minute, let me finish.
If that's true,
so they're
it's not true.
They're paying a quarter of a point for excess reserve interest, which even shows how outrageously disconnected they are from reality. They have an interest rate that's basically undermining their own strategy. The whole thing is flawed. And when you said, well, it's the only entity that's doing anything, I say if my doctor is out of the office, I'm still not going to go to somebody in an alley with leeches.
Well, if you're bleeding, I think you might go to anybody you can put a tourniquet on, Rick. But that's a strained metaphor right there on my part. But let me just make the point here. If you can help out the construction business, if you can help out home prices, all right, what happens when home prices rise? Fewer people are then underwater. In fact, CoreLogic says some 600,000 people, I believe in the second quarter, were no longer underwater. Part of that has to do with rising home prices. That's what happens. If that happens, Sully, then you can have those people refinance if their homes are no longer underwater. If home prices have a floor underneath them, banks will be more likely to lend. It's not.
That's a good point. I just hope that these policies do benefit those that are not just asset groups.
I want to make a point here, okay? Who are the people who are net savers, okay? They tend to be wealthy people. And even if they have a large mortgage, you get a large benefit, they probably also have a large pension, and they're taking it on the saving side as well.
What about all the retired people
I'm going to do a Rick
wealthy?
Santelli here and say time out, gentlemen. Fantastic debate.
Does that mean we get to come back, or is this just an end of the game?
You get to come back.
I mean,
but
is
not
it time out?
But not today.
Oh, so it's not a timeout. You're saying the game's over. You're throwing up your flag.
Goodbye.
We have more things to talk about.
We have many more things to talk about.